The Silmarillion is hard to read for most readers because it is simply a different format than what many fans of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings come to expect when reading Tolkien. One of the reasons for its difficulty is the format. As the Silmarillion starts with the beginning of creation of Middle-earth, it follows a different format. One can say it is a similar format to the Bible. Attached to the Waldman letter showed an outline of the Silmarillion starting from the music of the Ainur, then the history of the Eldar, or the beginning of the Elves. This would involve the history of the First Age, 3 great jewels of Fëanor, the Silmarils, their making, theft, the word for the recovery, and final loss. Next would be the shape of the world, followed by descent of tongues, Annals of Valinor, Annals of Beleriand, Children of Húrin, Fall of Gondolin, and the Lay of Leithian, known as Beren and Luthien. However, these were not proposed for publication at the time, and the final version turned out to be slightly different, with Beren and Luthien being before the Children of Húrin, for example. Also, the Silmarillion ended up covering all of that, plus much of the Second and Third Ages more broadly. This is in contrast to the format of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, which seems to cover one specific time in Middle-earth. Another reason for its difficulty is its time frame, which contrasts from a particular period of time in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Unlike the Silmarillion, The Hobbit was published and described as a longish story of about 300 pages, in fairy story style and colloquial prose for most part, a tale of romantic adventure among the people and creatures of the Western world towards the end of the Third Age, where the growing shadow of Sauron Redivivus, the Third Dark Lord, begins to be felt. Its main ostensible story is only loosely connected with the Great Cycle, but it is a vital link in that cycle, since it relates to discovery and bringing to light again of what eventually proves to be the Fatal One Ring. Lord of the Rings, the major romance or tale of the whole, which attempts to interweave and wind up all the themes and plots that have preceded, to combine the mythical, elvish, heroic, and fairy tale elements in story and in style, and onto them in one theme: the destruction of the ring, the overthrow of Sauron, the last visible material Dark Lord, the re-establishment of the Númenórean throne, and so to end the Third Age, bring the lingering dominion of the elves to a close, and stop on the threshold each of approx 12 chapters, and contains possibly 600,000 words. It contains, as it were, world events and policies as seen or suffered by simple hobbits, and so begins and ends in the shadow of the hobbits, as did the previous book. In both cases, a long story was made in mind. Lord of the Rings attempts to interweave and wind up all the themes and plots, after which it would be weaved into one theme, so it can be read as what many call novel form, as that is to be expected in a typical novel. The Silmarillion aims to keep the different themes and stories distinct, but still presented in chapter form. The Silmarillion covers the entire span of 2 different ages, the First Age and Second Age, as well as the formation of Middle-earth. All in all, this goes to show the Silmarillion covering aspects of Tolkien's world-building, which is also why it lacks a single narrative, focusing on the greater aspect of building a world, which is contrast to The Hobbit, which centers around the year 2941 of the Third Age. Lord of the Rings does cover a bit more, starting from 3001 to 3021 of the Third Age, as it aims to interweave many different aspects of the world of Middle-earth to create a smaller scope of common theme. Last but not least, another reason could be the lack of single narrative that readers may come to expect in novels. Unlike The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion doesn't seem to follow one main narrative and is told in a broader perspective, as it seems to be meant to be a creation story. As one goes through the Silmarillion, we find the accounts describing a different main narrative each chapter, or by groupings of few chapters depending on which one. It starts with the creation story, where the Ainur, the children of Ilúvatar, were made. As it goes through multiple accounts, the focus changes through the lens of Thingol and Melian, then the creation of the first elves, and Beren and Luthien, Turin, and finally Eärendil. As the characters change, the themes change as well, which is different than the singular focus of a major romance or tale in The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. The cycles begin with the cosmogonical myth, the music of the Ainur, God and the Valar, or powers, English as gods, are revealed. These latter are, as we should say, angelic powers, whose function is to exercise delegated authority in the spheres of rule and government, not creation, making, or remaking. They are divine, that is, were originally outside and existed before the making of the world. Their power and wisdom is derived from their knowledge of the cosmogonical drama, which they perceive first as a drama, that is, as in a fashion we perceive a story composed by someone else, and later as a reality. On the side of mere narrative device, that is, of course, meant to provide beings of the same order of beauty, power, and majesty as the gods of higher mythology, which can yet be accepted, well, shall we say baldly, by a mind that believes in the Blessed Trinity. As the Silmarillion goes from the music of the Ainur to the history of the elves, the Silmarillion proper, a different theme, is incorporated, which is from the theme of that the elves are made to be immortal, while the men are made to be mortal. This theme would only be covered shortly before the focus would move away from this theme, though it will arguably go back to it at the end of the Second Age. However, the focus will remain on the elves. As I say, the legendary Silmarillion is peculiar and differs from all similar things that I know in not being anthropocentric. Its center of view and interest is not men but elves. Men came in inevitably. After all, the author is a man, and if he has an audience, they will be men, and men must come into our tales as such, and not merely transfigured or partially represented as elves, dwarfs, hobbits, etc. But they remain peripheral, latecomers, and however growingly important, not principals. Meanwhile, there's also another shift in narrative from history and mythology to story and romance, as the stories become less mythical and more like stories and romances. As a result, the men would be interwoven as they reject the service of evil and come into contact with the exiled elves. This contract between the elves and men would foreshadow the history of the later ages. The main narrative would change again to men being derived from the elves. While Tolkien specifically calls Beren and Luthien the chief of the stories in the Silmarillion, he seems to give that honor also to the children of Húrin, the tale of a tragic hero, Turin and his sister Ninio, as well as the fall of Gondolin, and the tale of Eärendil the Wanderer, which will be in the last chapter of the Quenta Silmarillion before the First Age ends, and the narrative switch to those of the Second and Third Ages.